What if the pursuit of happiness is what's keeping you sick? We live in a culture that worships happiness as the ultimate goal. Every ad, every slogan, every self-help book echoes the same mantra: be positive, stay strong, smile more. We are told that healing means feeling good, and that suffering is a personal failure. But what if this very ideology, this refusal to face pain, is what keeps us trapped in cycles of anxiety, numbness, and quiet despair? One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung. This isn't just poetic, it's psychological truth. Real healing doesn't come from pretending we're okay. It comes from descending into the shadow, into the very pain we've been taught to avoid. We don't heal by escaping the darkness. We heal by turning toward it. Happiness, as it's sold to us, is often just repression in disguise. When we're told to just move on, let it go, or choose joy, what we're really being asked to do is disown our wounds. But healing doesn't mean becoming cheerful. It means becoming whole. And wholeness includes everything: sadness, anger, grief, confusion. Healing is the brave act of embracing what hurts, of sitting with discomfort long enough to understand its message. We've been seduced into thinking that peace lies in avoidance. But the soul doesn't heal through denial. It heals through confrontation, through grief, through acknowledgement. If you're still hurting, it doesn't mean you're broken. It may just mean you're finally getting close to the truth, to the wound, to the moment where real healing can begin. We live in a world that treats pain like a problem to be fixed, not a reality to be honored. From the moment we're old enough to cry, we're offered distractions: a toy, a screen, a bribe, a "don't cry, you're okay." Slowly we internalize the message: your feelings are too much, your sadness is inconvenient, your anger is unacceptable. This is not nurturing. This is emotional erasure disguised as love. Society pathologizes pain. Depression is seen as dysfunction. Anxiety is labeled disorder. Grief is given a deadline. Instead of being initiated into the complexity of our emotions, we are taught to bypass them altogether, to keep it together, to be strong, to smile, even when our insides are in flames. This is not just cultural, it's psychological. According to Freud, when we're unable to fully feel and express our pain, we repress it. We lock it away in the unconscious, hoping it will disappear. But what's repressed doesn't vanish, it mutates. It returns as anxiety, rage, addiction, or a chronic emptiness we can't explain. Jung took this further, naming it the shadow, the rejected parts of ourselves that we exile in order to survive, only for them to haunt us later from the dark. James Hillman, with his poetic lens, called it soul loss, not in a religious sense, but in a mythopoetic one. When we are forced to disown our pain, we sever ourselves from our depth, our imagination, our story. We become personas, masks crafted to please others, avoid rejection, and perform normalcy. But behind these masks, the psyche starves. We begin to dissociate, not just from trauma, but from truth. We learn to inhabit only a fraction of ourselves, to live in surface-level conversations and performative emotions. Real intimacy becomes terrifying. Vulnerability feels dangerous, because in a world that demands resilience, softness becomes shameful. And so we grow into adults who are emotionally split. We say, "I'm fine," while dying inside. We laugh at jokes we don't find funny. We keep busy, not because we're productive, but because silence might resurrect the grief we buried decades ago. This cultural denial of suffering doesn't just harm individuals, it shapes entire generations. We inherit the emotional wounds of our parents, who were never taught to feel. We raise children in homes where no one screams, but no one truly speaks either. Silence replaces substance, smiles replace truth. But what if pain isn't the enemy? What if the presence of sorrow means the psyche is trying to tell a story it was never allowed to voice? What if suffering, when witnessed without judgment, becomes sacred? To heal, we must first rebel. We must recognize that feeling deeply is not weakness, it's a radical act in a dissociated world. The wounded parts of us do not need to be silenced. They need to be seen, because true healing doesn't begin when we feel better. It begins when we dare to feel at all. Real healing does not ascend, it descends. It doesn't lift you into light, it pulls you into shadow. The modern obsession with rising above it, with transcending pain or staying positive, completely misses the point. In the work of the soul, you don't get to skip the underworld. True transformation begins not with escape, but with entry, into the ache, into the memory, into the raw, unprocessed grief that still lives in the body. We must go down to go through. Myth understood this long before psychology did. In the ancient Sumerian tale of Inanna, the Queen of Heaven voluntarily descends into the underworld, shedding one piece of her identity at each of its 7 gates. Her crown, her jewels, her robes, symbols of power, control, persona, are stripped away. When she finally meets her sister Ereshkigal, Queen of the Dead, she is naked, powerless, and utterly exposed. It is here, in the place of death, silence, and darkness, that the initiation begins. Orpheus, too, must descend, not for glory, but for love. He enters Hades not to conquer, but to recover what was lost. Christ retreats into the tomb for 3 days before resurrection. These are not heroes' journeys of conquest, they are stories of surrender. Psychologically, this descent mirrors what Carl Jung called the night sea journey, a plunge into the unconscious, into the wound we spend our lives avoiding. It is not a linear process. It does not guarantee comfort, but it is the only path to wholeness. The wound is not a mistake. It is a portal. Your trauma does not need to be fixed or erased. It needs to be witnessed, understood, held. And for that, you must be willing to sit in its presence. No quick solutions, no spiritual bypassing, just the brutal honesty of being with what is. This descent asks everything of us. It requires we stop numbing, that we turn off the distractions, that we ask the terrifying questions. Why am I really afraid to feel this? What memory still owns me? What part of myself did I abandon to survive? But in the dark, we find what we thought we lost, the parts of ourselves buried beneath shame, fear, and silence. As Jung said, the gold is in the shadow. The very thing we try to escape is what holds our power. Descent is not regression. It is initiation. It's not weakness. It's the beginning of truth. And when you allow yourself to go down, into the past, into the wound, into the moment you thought you would never survive, you don't just find pain, you find you, the real you, the one who was silenced, the one who waited in the dark. That reunion is the first step toward becoming whole, not by climbing out, but by going in. At the center of every adult wound is a child who was left behind, not necessarily abandoned in the physical sense, but emotionally, spiritually, psychically. A child who was told their sadness was too much, who learned to shrink their joy, their fear, their rage, because it made others uncomfortable. A child who internalized the lie, if I want love, I must not be all of me. This is the inner orphan, and whether we know it or not, we carry them into every relationship, every fear, every silence. Jung spoke of the inner child as the living, breathing soul image of our earliest experiences. When this child is shamed, neglected, or ignored, it doesn't disappear. It becomes buried, exiled into the unconscious. But its voice doesn't vanish. It echoes through our reactions, our self-sabotage, our need for validation, our terror of being abandoned again. Worse yet, we replace the nurturing voice that child needed with the one they feared most, the inner critic, the internalized parent, teacher, or peer who told us we were too sensitive, too loud, not good enough. This voice doesn't protect us, it polices us. And under its rule, the orphaned parts of the psyche remain locked away, misunderstood, and unloved. This is not just psychological theory, it is lived reality. Why do we sabotage closeness just when we crave intimacy? Why do we lash out when we feel unseen? Why do we become small in moments that ask for courage? It's not immaturity. It's the orphan acting out from a wound that was never acknowledged. Healing is not about silencing the orphan. It's about meeting them. It's about turning inward with compassion, finding that small, scared version of yourself, and saying what no one else ever did. I see you, I believe you, you are not wrong to hurt. This is not sentimental. It is sacred grief. Because grieving is not weakness. It's memory rising to be felt. Every time we cry, not just from the present, but from a place that feels older, deeper, almost ancient, that's the inner orphan knocking on the door of our consciousness. To heal is to open that door, to sit with them, to hear their story without interruption, and over time to reparent them, to offer them the safety, structure, and tenderness they were once denied. This process is not fast, it is not glamorous, but it is transformative. When the orphan feels safe, the adult begins to thrive. We become less reactive, more rooted. We stop demanding that others fill the emotional void we were never meant to carry alone. We find, perhaps for the first time, the voice of the inner nurturer, the wise, grounded presence within that says you are no longer alone. And that, more than happiness, is healing. Not fixing the wound, but loving the one who still carries it. Pain, when denied, festers. When medicated or ignored, it returns in new disguises: panic attacks, chronic fatigue, broken relationships, hollow ambition. But when pain is integrated, something extraordinary happens. It becomes meaningful. This is the heart of psychological alchemy, the ancient idea that the soul, like lead, can be transmuted into gold, not by escaping suffering, but by entering it consciously and imaginatively. The raw wound doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes a story, a symbol, a source of depth. James Hillman, a master of depth psychology, offered a radical view. Healing is not about symptom removal, it's about symptom interpretation. When we obsess over getting rid of anxiety or depression, we risk missing the deeper question. What is the soul trying to say through this suffering? Hillman wrote that symptoms are not obstacles on the path, they are the path. That neuroses are not diseases to be fixed, but expressions of the soul's forgotten language. Through this lens, pain is not a problem, it's a messenger. But to receive the message, we must engage imagination, because the psyche does not speak in diagnosis, it speaks in symbol. This is why healing requires more than analysis, it requires art, ritual, journaling, painting, dream work. These are not distractions from recovery, they are doorways. When we write to the inner child, when we paint the image from last night's nightmare, when we light a candle for the parts of us we've abandoned, we are not being sentimental. We are practicing alchemy. We are giving form to what was once formless. We are turning pain into image, into rhythm, into language. And through this act of symbolic engagement, the psyche begins to reassemble itself, not as it was, but as it is becoming. This is the difference between numbing and healing. Numbing flattens life. Healing deepens it. It lets the pain speak in a different register, not as torment, but as initiation. The trauma becomes a threshold, the anxiety becomes a guide, the sorrow becomes a sacred well. We begin to ask new questions. Not how do I stop hurting, but what does this pain want from me? Not how can I get back to normal, but what version of me is trying to be born through this rupture? To answer those questions, we must imagine. And in doing so, we begin the soul's most essential work, making meaning. This is not the kind of healing you can measure in productivity. It's not always visible, but it's felt quietly, deeply, unmistakably. A sense of inner coherence begins to form. The chaos finds a narrative, the sorrow finds a voice, and that is the gold hidden in the wound. Not happiness, but meaning. Not escape, but embodiment. Not the end of suffering, but the beginning of soul. You may not be happy, but you are something far more honest. You still carry the grief. It still echoes sometimes, in the quiet hours or unexpected smells, in songs that touch a place you forgot you had. But now you don't run from it. You don't shove it down or pretend it doesn't matter. You let it be there, with you, beside you, part of you. That is the quiet revolution. Healing did not arrive like a lightning bolt or a breakthrough epiphany. It unfolded slowly, secretly, in the tender act of staying with yourself, in choosing not to numb, in choosing not to abandon, in choosing to breathe through the ache instead of override it. You stopped performing okayness. You stopped needing to be fixed. And you started listening to the wound, to the orphaned voice within, to the body that trembled not from weakness, but from memory. This is not the kind of healing that makes headlines. There's no before and after photo, no trophy, no graduation day, and yet it changes everything. Because now, when pain knocks, you don't hide. You open the door, you sit down beside it, you ask it what it needs. Healing doesn't promise euphoria, it promises presence. You become the one who can hold space for discomfort, who can be in the room with rage, with shame, with sorrow, and not collapse. This isn't about being unbreakable, it's about being unafraid of breaking. That is real power, and from that power comes a new kind of freedom. The kind that doesn't depend on circumstances, approval, or the absence of pain. A freedom born of inner integrity. A freedom where you don't have to split yourself to survive. You carry grief and grace in the same breath, and somehow you are more alive for it. This is the threshold where healing becomes wholeness, not perfection, but coherence. You become the home your younger self never had, the witness they always longed for, the protector, the nurturer, the sacred presence within. So now the question turns to you, reader, listener, soul. Can you stay? Can you witness what hurts without flinching? Can you let go of the idea that healing means never feeling pain again? Can you hold the bleeding parts of yourself with the same tenderness you offer to those you love? Because this work, the quiet, slow, invisible work, is not just for you. It ripples. It softens the world. It undoes generations of silence. You may never be happy in the way the world defines it, but you will be free. You will be real. You will be whole. And that, in the end, is the only kind of healing that lasts.